Hello whisky fans, hello malt mates, hello aficionados. Why not? Anyone who takes their time to watch a video which is quite specialist relating to quality sipping spirits is absolutely, in my eyes, an aficionado. And the definition of an aficionado is someone who is invested beyond superficial acquaintance, having invested money, time and effort to learn to appreciate real quality in all its manifestations, whether it be a light style of single malt, whether it be a heavy molasses rum, whether it be a new generation of redefined bourbon. It's a fascinating journey, and we're all taking that, and you are included because you happen to be watching this video. And this is Ralphie Review 1072 Extras, and I'm going to address something which we're all aware of, but it never really gets fully articulated. And it's the fact is, how does the global distilling industry actually relate to us? What do they want from us? What do we want from them? And how do we meet in the middle? In its most superficial and simplistic form, the industry wants profits from us. They want volume of sale, and within that volume of sale of their product, they want better margins. They want higher percentages of profit. And therefore they go to a great deal of effort to persuade us using different, perhaps superficial psychological manipulation, which is what basic advertising is. Or they get more advanced and we meet them at whisky festivals and we chat with them and we start to put names to individuals representing both large and small distilleries. And we get chatting to them and we listen carefully to what they say, because we want to know, do they want to share with us the information and the knowledge and experience they have to elevate our decision making, to empower us to feel empowered in the way we spend our money in whisky and other quality spirits. And we do notice that there is a trend. Now, it's not a consistent trend. It's not absolutely polarized, but we do notice the trend that the big corporations, by their very size and scale of operation, tend to be a little bit more, not a little bit, tend to be distinctively more remote from us. And therefore they interface using their brand ambassadors, who will, if they're not doing their job properly, will stick to script and give us a very rehearsed narrative and hope, fingers crossed, that it does the trick. Now, early on in our whisky journey, that tends to work in their favour. However, things change. And one of the prominent things that changes is we get to know more. And this is why we find ourselves fairly early in our whisky journey, far faster than used to happen in the old days, 10, 20, certainly 30, 40 years ago. We start to shift our allegiances to brands. We're looking for the authenticity of the narrative, and we're looking for a narrative and communication from the distillers which is free of condescending, filler and disingenuous claims, statements and fake narratives. It's fascinating to be part of this, but we soon learn that as time goes on, we're making purchasing mistakes. We're still drawn by that conventional narrative, particularly from the bigger companies who do not want to discuss the negative impact of chill filtration and the real reason they're using colourant in their whiskies, which is to disguise the fact frequently that they're not getting the fullness of maturation and the natural colour that comes from proper, authentic maturation from the casks. And this leads us to a bit of a dilemma. Part of that dilemma, by the way, and I'll mention this in passing, is we start to get a little bit disillusioned. And it affects the pace at which we're buying whisky. This is a perfectly natural stage and we should embrace it. We should become a little bit disillusioned. When we are buying a bottle of whisky and we pour a glass and we kind of enjoy it, and it says in the label that it's non-chill filtered, but then we're looking for the Scotch mist to appear, particularly in single malt whisky. We're looking for that Scotch whisky to appear. We're looking for that thread-like viscosity of the viscimmetry when we add a drop of water to the glass while we hold it up so we can see through the glass and we can see how dense the spirit is, how oily the spirit is. We know what we're looking for because we learn that fairly early on, because it's a vital part of us channeling and refocusing and recalibrating what we're going to spend our money on and what we're going to buy. In the last few years, the situation has tended to be in the favour of the whisky industry because they're very good at whipping up an enthusiasm, particularly in whisky clubs and at whisky festivals, because mild intoxication elevates our receptiveness to being enthusiastic. We realise we're part of a big community who are more informed than the less informed. And so we separate ourselves from the occasional infrequent buyer, also known as the passive consumer, who will, on occasion, perhaps for the new year, perhaps for a wedding, perhaps for a birthday, or just perhaps for a spontaneous gift or present for someone, who will go and buy a bottle of whisky simply because of the habitual nature of previous purchases. When they're tasting that whisky, they're getting what they're looking for, which is a superficial engagement and something that just gets them a little bit pissed. Frequently, they're putting ice in the tumbler because they're not going to use a Copita or a wine glass or a Glencairn glass. That's what we use because it's functional glassware. And it helps to focus the nose. And with smaller vessels, helps to focus on quality over quantity. And we know, in fact, when we consume too much quantity of alcohol, it actually diminishes our appreciation of the quality of it. Because that's what happens. The amount of times that you can put any glass of whisky in front of a perfectly sober person and they don't enjoy the first few tastes, but after a couple of glasses, and then some, they start to enjoy it. And they're confused because they're not enjoying the calibre of the experience of smell and taste anymore. It's not particularly good. They're enjoying the melodic experience of getting intoxicated slowly. When you start mixing up the drinks into cocktails, you speed up the whole process, and it makes it easier to disguise the coarse and inferior young alcohol. Simply because all the other flavours in there, and in particular the sugar, the sweetness, to fill in the gaps and disguise the inferior quality. I noticed this particularly with rum drinkers who are very much into their cocktails and pina coladas and dark and stormies and all the rest of it, that it becomes habitual. It's the lazy way of drinking. And I don't mean that as a judgment. I mean that as an observation. An observation is something we really need to do as we develop our whisky palate. We need to observe our perceived trust and integrity in the company delivering the brand. we need to trust our own developing sense of smell and taste and enjoy what we're getting out the whisky and not what we're told by others that we should be getting out the whisky or any other spirit. This is our solitary journey. It's always more fun when we do it in company, depending, of course, on the quality of the company we're keeping. And often you can find in the company of others, it's really good to help us question, what's the quality of tasting? What's the experience? Why do I find myself, and this is a question we all ask, on several occasions during this journey, we ask, actually, what am I really enjoying here? Has it been the sweetness of the barley sugar, the honey notes? Has it been the intensity of that phenolic composition from the peat? Has it been the big fruitcake event from the sherry monster? We go through these stages, it's perfectly natural, and it's good to experience them because we're building up our library of experience and memory. But as time goes on, we inevitably find ourselves getting more fussy. And this changes our direction from the producers who are increasingly disappointing us with the experience they're selling us, to other producers, usually smaller producers, and certainly the independent bottlers, where we're enjoying the complexity, the challenge, the heightened sensation involvement of sour and bitter and savoury and umami. The savoury and umami, of course, go together. We're enjoying that more, and at first we enjoy a little bit of it, but as time goes on, we enjoy more of it. We're looking for that. And because we're elevating our palate through our own personal and practical experience, we need to do this, otherwise we get disillusioned to the point that we stop drinking whisky. Now, in the short term, there's no harm in that, but in the longer term, we're kind of missing out on something that we've particularly enjoyed. And as we gain more composure over our palates and more control over the volume we're consuming, we may find ourselves participating less and more infrequently with the whisky, but when we do so, we're enjoying it even more than previously, because there's more going on, there's more theatre, there's more animation, there's more substance to the liquor. And this is the precious alchemic property of alcohol. It is unsurpassed in delivering complexity of smell, taste, sensation, form, event, and aftertaste that we get from whiskies or whatever spirit we're drinking. At this point, we need to be cautious here, because a bad bottle, one that disappoints us, is not necessarily a bad whisky. It just happens to be a whisky that under-delivers. Now, in many occasions, we can actually go into our opened bottle stash and just top up slightly with another whisky or the same whisky from another bottle, and it rectifies it. It doesn't take much. It's remarkable how little of an additional input from another spirit can enhance and enliven and reinvigorate what is, in fact, increasingly a lackluster experience. But ultimately, we need to be more cautious in what we're buying, we need to be more self-disciplined, and we need to observe financial controls on this. This is something the whisky industry doesn't want to talk about, because primarily they're just looking for our money. But our challenge is to look after our money. We don't mind buying the whisky, but we do mind having an under-delivered experience. Sure, we know what a bad whisky is, and it's always good to have a bottle of bad whisky on your shelf, because nothing sets up a good whisky better than a pre-tasting of bad whisky, with its poor quality cask, Might be a bit sulphured, might be a bit acetic and vinegary, because the cask has been left empty too long and the bacterial growth has created acidity within the wood itself, and this transfers into the spirit, because spirits are very chameleon in the way they absorb not just the flavour from the cask, but the personality and signature of the cask. So when we're buying whisky, we need a little rule book, particularly as we get more experienced. We've got to be careful what we buy. Whisky festivals are really good for this. They let us taste and try before we buy. Also, the specialist liquor retailer can be very good for this if they're doing their job professionally. And this is why we move away from spontaneous purchasing, particularly when someone else has purchased something and say, oh yeah, that was a brilliant whiskey, I really enjoyed it, I bought the bottle 4 years ago, and you're thinking, because you've got experience now, how much has changed in that 4 years at the distillery? Are the quality of casks the same as they used to be? Have they elevated the bottling strength, or even reduced the bottling strength? These are all the complex factors that come into play, and we have to take into consideration before we put our cash on the barrel or on the shop counter and start buying our whisky. Let me give you 3 pieces of practical advice. 1, hesitate more before you buy. Wean yourself out of the habit of spontaneous purchases on a whim, because you don't have to worry if you're missing out. You don't have to bother about FOMO, that's fear of missing out, because you know, I know, we all know there'll be another barrel along soon, another bottling along soon, another distillery will appear with something exciting. There will always be whisky out there. Even if they banned it and prohibited it, there would still be whisky, just like there was in the USA in the 1920s. There's always a market when there's a demand, no matter what the law says. The law, of course, the authorities are very much aware of this. So they do their best to kind of restrict what we can get. For example, a good illustrative example is in Norway, you cannot buy any spirits over 60% alcohol. This is to stop people being alcoholics. But I would suggest that alcoholics are too busy buying standard bottles of vodka and cheap alcohol, and they're not particularly bothered about the strength of it. Unlike the connoisseur, who recognises the strength of the alcohol is in fact creating a capacity to deliver more complexity of flavour and fullness of flavour. If we know how to bring the strength down gradually and incrementally to get the bliss point and maintain that bliss point through the experience. The second piece of advice I would give you is set yourself a budget and do not go over it. Whether it be £500, dollars or euros a year, try it and see. You do not necessarily get a better experience when you buy more expensive whisky. Part of the knowledge is knowing that there are standard whiskies out there which are really good, and they cover the corners. They provide what we're looking for. And to be content with a decent whisky is far more rewarding than to be disappointed with a better whisky which has ultimately failed to deliver your expectations. The third piece of advice I would give is this. Cultivate your relationships within the whisky community. You do not need to be a particular extrovert to do this. You can observe from a distance on social media, looking at the videos, participating in the forums, and find out what other people are buying. And you will notice over time that there are people who are consistent and reliable in the feedback that they give to you on recommendations that you might consider for purchasing. Also, specialist retailers. If you can cultivate a good relationship with a high street retailer, the specialist, who at this moment in time, with the current economic climate, is getting even more specialist to look after their customer base. You may find you're spending a small premium in the bottle price, but with the advice and the interaction and guidance that you get from the specialist retailer who's tasting the stuff that comes into the shop, you're going to get a better deal at the end of the day, because you'll have more rewarding purchases. Not the purchases you could get from Amazon or even the big online retailers, although they, in fairness, they do their best to have their pick of their month, or their malt of the month, or their bourbon of the month, to basically say, well, the staff have tasted this, this is what we think's good, and this is what we're recommending to you. Ultimately, they're investing in sales to you, and as a result of this, they need to build up a level of trust. And at the end of the day, my third piece of advice, my final piece of advice, would be trust your own palate. Don't rush it. This isn't a journey you can rush. You'll actually get more out of it the slower you go. And when occasionally you do have a disappointing purchase, the challenge to you is to actually explain to yourself and understand why it's disappointing. I'll give you a good illustrative example of this. Clynelish, an iconic Scotch single malt whisky. Recently, about 2.5 years ago, the distillery cleaned out the pipes. And the consequence is we got a lovely whisky which was completely devoid of the classic characteristic waxy note that Clynelish is famous for. We need to be aware of that, because there's nothing more disappointing to us than when we know a really, really good single malt and we go back out to buy another bottle of it, and they have changed the delivery of the event. The producers have changed the delivery, and they don't want to admit that it has damaged the profile. But we've got to be in a position of self-confidence to know that, yes, they have tarnished and diminished the profile. And therefore, it's time to look elsewhere. Where do we look? We look at other whiskies that are kind of like Clynelish, but different signatures, different personalities, but they have the same fullness of character. For example, independent bottlings of Mortlach, or bottles of Edradour, particularly signatory bottles of Edradour. Two very good examples as options to replace something which has disappointed you. And don't forget that once we've been disappointed with a brand once, we then have the suspicion that we can be disappointed again, but the next time even more so, because we've made a mistake purchase, not once, but twice. And we don't want that. Knowledge is everything, and knowledge comes with self-confidence and experience of knowing and valuing our own individual palates. And increasingly, before we buy anything, we do the groundwork. We become a Sherlock Holmes to reduce and diminish the risk of being disappointed. This is the challenge we accept ourselves. It's a worthy challenge, actually, because as much as we can be disappointed with some purchases, we may end up purchasing something else and having the satisfaction and positivity of that purchase exceed our expectations, and it becomes a special and a precious bottle. And then we know from experience that we go out and we quickly, without leaving it too long, because we don't want to wait for the next batch, we go out and we buy a second bottle and we put it in our stash. And therefore we are cataloguing our future whisky enjoyment, our whisky appreciation, by having a small stockpile, which it shouldn't get too large. And importantly, as always, we shouldn't be drinking too much. That's our responsibility. Thank you.